Hi, and welcome back to the Choosing Known podcast. I'm Laura Catherine Etheridge, and I am glad to be back with each of you today. Hope you're having a nice day and a good week. So, I am really thirsty, and I just happen to have these two glasses here with me today. And these two are poured and they are ready to drink. And one of them is filled with water. And one of them is filled with Dawn dish soap. I know, so strange. So I have both of them, and I'm kind of trying to pick which one of these should I drink? Kind of brainless question, right? Duh. Of course you should drink the water. Why do I bring these today? And why do I start the podcast in this way? Last episode, we talked about together a couple of quotes, one of them by C.S. Lewis, that all of us are filled with an inconsolable longing. We began to explore that idea of that deep down soul part of us, that wanting to be fulfilled, the gas gauge, it wants to be fulfilled all the time. And it's that, as C.S. Lewis called it, that inconsolable longing that each of us feels every day. We have it. And we also looked at a quote by Blaise Pascal, and we talked about how he called it the God-shaped vacuum in the heart of each man. The God-shaped vacuum. And we've begun, the last couple of episodes together, we've begun to look at this slide. Why do we do what we do? And how do we go about doing it? And we've talked about how God created, we looked at it together last time, the heart and the will, and He loves it. It is a beautiful creation that we have a will. We're not like birds. We don't have to just do the same thing all the time like birds do. We actually get to pick. We get to create. We get to decide things that we think about and we feel and we believe in what we do, and God loves that about us. He delights in that. So He gave us this will, and we also began to talk a little bit about with our how, why here. We've talked about, and He also has this deep part of who we are, our soul, our personality that's created by God that is wanting to be fulfilled, and it's communicating inside of our being, continually saying, I long for fulfillment, and these things make me feel more fulfilled and full. And these things really make me feel empty and not fulfilled. And God put that inside of us. And we want to explore that part more together today. So we talked about will last time. And today we really want to build on that idea. And so I brought these two cups along. And I brought them along because thirst being quenched is maybe a good way of thinking about desire. I know we've talked about that some, but the soul and its longing for fulfillment, another way we can think of that is using the word desire. I desire. I long for that. And just like we long when we're thirsty to be quenched, we really long for our desire to be met and to be fulfilled. Just like the gas gauge, I want to be full, and I want to be full as much as possible, as long as possible. So we're going to spend some time on that today and explore a little bit more about why use those cups. You probably will remember me last time talking about how the Bible is filled with two different kinds of plans for how we use our will to create fulfillment, or to, as we're talking about today, satisfy our desire and make that part of us not feel so empty. So if I was to pick this one, what would that mean? What would that actually mean? I'm picking something that might really be good for, in this case, my dishes. It might really even be good for other things that I would be washing. But if I pick this and I was to consume this, that would not be good, right? It would really hurt me. And it could really create in me illness and potentially beyond illness. So it's good for something. It's one of the options, but it's not so good for me. Now, if I was to go over here and I was to pick this one, the water, this is a really good thing, right? This is really good for me. We know that. And why do we know that? Well, we know that we're made up of a significant percentage of water, for one. And if I drink this, it's going to satisfy my thirst. And not only is it going to satisfy my thirst in the moment, it's going to help contribute to my overall health. And it's also going to help me live, to stay alive and to continue to live. So we have this analogy of desire. We have our idea of there's two ways of meeting that. And we have choices. We have two different choices. Now, in this one, I'm making it very easy. It's a very obvious choice. But we want to say, okay, why use that analogy? Why go into that? Last time we were together, I talked about how the Bible, from cover to cover, it gives us the strategies or the plans for how we're going to meet fulfillment. And you probably remember me saying there are two of them. And the Bible goes into extensive detail on the two plans that are out there that people pick to meet their desire. And I'm just going to reference a few of the places just so we kind of hear how across the Bible this idea is. So in Genesis 2, we hear the analogy, instead of these two cups, we hear the analogy being two trees. And then in Deuteronomy 30, so a couple of books later, it's two choices. And then in Jeremiah 6, it's two pathways that we can walk in. And then in Matthew 7, we get multiple examples. We get the example of two houses and two gates. And then when we move into Matthew 16 and also Mark 8, we get the idea of two different strategies. And we go into Luke and we get the idea of two directions. And if we look at John, we hear about it being two different voices. So I'm just listing a few of those for us to realize, yeah, these two options of the plan to get fulfillment, they're scattered across the entirety of the Bible. And I just pulled a few of them for us to know about. So today we're going to unpack one of those more deeply. And before we do that, I'm going to do something that I think will just help make it go a little bit faster. And some of my clients and especially my military clients, they sometimes have this phrase, and I like it, or this word they use, and they talk about the bluff, that we want to have the bottom line up front. Give me the bluff. And so what I want to do is I want to give you the bluff on this idea. So let's pull back up here. We have our why and how slide. And what is the bluff of why we do what we do? We pick our plan, that one of the two options, the one that we believe is going to create fulfillment. We are either going to pick the one that we think is best, or we're going to pick a strategy that God puts out there for us and says, this one is the best. And if we pick ours, it means I think my way is better than God's. And I think I'm more trustworthy. Like, I think I can do a better job of using my will to create fulfillment. I can do better than the other option, which is God's plan. So I feel like I trust me better. I think I could be better at it. I think I'm maybe smarter and more strategic. I know hearing that at face value, sometimes we go, I don't really think that. But we kind of do. In day-to-day life, we go, I don't know if I really want to trust God with that. I kind of think I might be able to get this done a little bit better or a little faster because he's just taking a long time. So we pick to do it our way. And we select that. We take our will and we say, let me do it our way. So that's our bluff. We're going to pick God's way, or we're going to pick our way. And now what we want to do is really go into one of these scriptures that teases out both of the plans. And in order to do that, I want to share one verse that just gives us some really great kind of critical context. It just helps set the stage. And that is a verse out of Genesis 2:7. And it says, "Then the Lord formed the man," and I brought another prop for us, "out of the dust." So this is a bowl of sand, but then the Lord God formed the man of the dust from the ground. I find that interesting. Sometimes we read the Bible fast, and you think about how hard it is to make something out of dust. How hard it is to make something out of that substance and make it stick. So it says, God formed the man of the dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living creature. So what is man made of? He's made out of dust, mankind, dust, and the very breath of God. And then when that happens, God breathes into that dust that he put together. He becomes a living being. And we've spent a lot of time talking about our being. We've explored a lot of that together, and we've talked about how our being is made up of our heart and our soul and our mind and our body. So he brings this dust together and he breathes into it. And then there is this first man, heart, soul, mind, body, fulfillment, longing, will, all of it. There it is. So we want to hold that in our head now, and we want to go and we want to hear a little bit more about how does this play out then when man, made of dust and the breath of God, when man picks one of the strategies or the other strategy, how is that going to play out? And so to do that, we want to go to Matthew. We're going to use the Matthew, one of those stories. And this is Matthew 7. And we're going to go through it kind of slowly, but it's Matthew 7:24 through 27. And this is the story of Jesus talking about, here's the two plans for how you can become fulfilled. And here's how they play out. And he's using the analogy now of the two houses. And so Jesus says, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock." Now, I thought about getting a rock, and I happen to have this rock here in my house. This is something I actually picked up in Thailand, of all places, when I helped lead a missions trip there a number of years ago. And this is a big piece of jade. It's a gigantic rock, and it's been carved, but it's a big piece of jade. And so we look in the scripture and it says, okay, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man that built his house on a rock. And the rain fell. Comes from top down. The rain fell, and the flood came, bottom up, the flood came, and the winds blew against the side of the house. They beat against the house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. It had been founded on the rock. And so what do we learn about plan number one? And Jesus is telling it to us in this way about house number one. What is house number one? You know, we live in this day and age, and we think about houses and we think about foundations under houses, and you know, houses are built very differently today than they were back then, but evidently we had foundations in houses. But when he's saying this house, what do we want to put in our head? Well, let's pull this back up. This slide we haven't looked at in a little while, options, actions. This is the house that he's talking about. This is a house, mind, heart, body, soul. This is the house that he's talking about. And so he says, the house is a person. And the house is a plan that they pick for living their life. So they got their will for living their life and gaining fulfillment. And the wise person, so plan number one, they choose the words of Jesus. And what were his words like? The words of Jesus, they were like solid piece of rock. That's what they were like, his words. How many directions was this house hit from? It was hit from the top. The rains come down, the floodwaters come up, and the winds blow against and beat against the house, but it doesn't fall because it's rock solid. It's rock solid. And why is it rock solid? Because the rock was held together. This is held together in the story by God himself. They were his words. And this house, we just talked about with the idea of mind and heart and body and soul, the house had been formed on the rock solid, the words of God, and they were never, ever, ever going to change. Now let's go and look at the second plan and look at the second option. Jesus continues and he says, everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like the foolish man who built his house on the sand. And we see that here's that sand. Foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell down, and the floodwaters rose, and the wind blew and beat against the house, and it fell. And great was the fall of it. So what do we learn about plan number 2? And in this case, Jesus is saying house number 2. What is house number 2? Here's our options action slide again. It's a person. It's their life. And the person in this case is picking to live their life. They're using their will, and they're picking plan number 2 in order to create fulfillment. And as they do that, they're called the foolish person. And why is that? Who did they choose to listen to? Not the words of Jesus. They chose to listen to, it doesn't say this in the scripture, but I kind of thought about it, and I'm like, well, if you're not listening to the words of Jesus, then you're listening to somebody else's words. You're listening to your own words. You're listening to words that are not from God. And when we do that, if we could take these little pieces, these are actually all bunches of little teeny rocks, and nothing's holding them together. And yet, isn't that so the case these days? Like, we are surrounded in this day and age in history with a lot of words that we can listen to. And it's not bad to listen to words, but we want to be really careful the words that we're listening to and using to build our life. And the foolish person in the story, the person that picked plan number 2 for gaining fulfillment in their life, what they chose to do was gather a bunch of other words together, their words, other people's words, words they got from somewhere, and they want to create this little foundation, and then they say, let me build my house. Let me build my house on that. But it's like sand. And then it gets hit like all of us do. Storms come in life, and it gets hit from every direction. The rain comes down, the floodwaters come up, the wind blows against the side of the house. And what happens? It falls. Its foundation was made up of a bunch of little particles and pieces. And here's the key. They weren't held together by anything. This rock, this is solid because it's held together by something. These aren't held together by anything. They're just a bunch of them, and they're disconnected. And so when the flood came and when the rain came down and when everything blew, the foundation just washed away. It eroded because it was made of particles and it was made of bits of rock that were held together by nothing but air. There's one other verse that's interesting to think about in light of that. And this verse is actually in Colossians 1:17. And it says, and it's talking about Jesus, and he is before all things. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So let's bring this all full circle now. We're going to look back here at our why and our how slide. We have our will and our heart at the top. We have the soul and the longing for fulfillment that, as C.S. Lewis talks about, is the inconsolable desire. And we talked about Blaise Pascal saying it's that God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every man. So it's regularly, ongoingly pulling and gnawing at us. And it's saying, I need to be fulfilled. And so then the will, our heart, is saying, okay, what am I going to do? I've got to be the one here that picks a plan in order to create fulfillment. And it's going to pick between one of two plans. We just explored one of them today, but it's going to pick between one of two plans. And either our house is going to be built, our entire house, our heart, our soul, our mind, our body, is going to be built on this solid foundation that even the worst of storms can't take out, because we're actually built on the very breath and the words of God. Remember we talked about that right before we looked at the houses. What was man made out of? He was made out of dust, and he was made out of the breath of God. And so we see with the house, this is the person whose life, heart, soul, mind, body, and strength, they're choosing to continue to live on the rock, which is the very breath and the words of God. They're listening to them, mind. They're picking that with their heart. They're acting upon those, body. That's what they're doing. And when we do that, we're going to have a life that's solid, even for the very worst of storms. But if we pick the other option, if we pick this option, if we pick this option, the sand, we're going to be the house that heart, soul, mind, and body, it's going to be built on particles. It's going to be built on dust. And nothing can hold that together. Nothing is holding it together. And when the storms come along in life, our house, we fall apart. And as Jesus said, great was the fall. Great was the fall. We're drinking this. We're living off of bits and particles, and we're just going to crumble because there's nothing that has the authority to hold together all of what we've picked to build our life on. And so we start seeing that. And what is that like? It's sometimes people use the word of the idea of disintegration. We start getting crumbly, and crumbly is we deal with a lot of anxiety, and crumbly is our emotions are sometimes all over the place, and our mind doesn't have peace because we're worried, and we don't feel fulfilled, and we keep trying and trying and trying to be, but we aren't. And our body isn't calm. It's filled with tension, and the different parts of who we are, mind and heart and body and strength, all of those, they start warring against each other. Sometimes we do something with our body that then gives us a ton of anxiety in our mind. And then sometimes we have these emotions that make us do crazy things with our body, and then our mind regrets it. And that's what it's like. We start crumbling apart, or we go through something really hard and we just feel like we're having, sometimes people call it a breakdown. We are, we're disintegrating because we're not built on the very, very words of Jesus that are held together by God himself. So option one, option two, we've gone into more of that today together. And I know that's a lot to think about, but we want to begin to realize we have a choice in how we are building our life. And, on a sunny day, we're not going to necessarily notice a lot of difference between this one and this one, a house built on that. But when the storms come, we are. And if we even think about going through something hard, there's more concern when we don't feel like we're built on a solid foundation. And so this week, that's a lot to soak in. Let it soak in. Consider which plan you tend to use. What do you take in? Think about what you take into our mind and believe. What are you taking in to your house? Well, what are you bringing in? We're picking something every day. We're picking one of those plans. We're bringing it in and we're building our life. Our life is built a day at a time, a moment at a time. It's built in moments and hours and days and then weeks and then months and then years and then a lifetime. That's how a life is built. And what we take in is creating the house that we're going to have. And it's the option that we're picking. And we're picking the one that we think is going to gain the most fulfillment. So just notice that this week. Look at, what do I take in? Which option do I pick? And we talked about will. Why am I picking it? To gain fulfillment. And what do I really believe about what's going to gain me fulfillment? That I'm going to be able to do that, my plan, or I'm going to rely on the words of God and the fact that he made me and he created my will to begin with. He created the longing inside. He actually made the longing that's there that we're trying to fulfill. And will he not much more? Matthew 6 talks about this. It's probably one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. If he takes care of the birds of the air, won't he much more take care of you? He made all that. He wants to fulfill it. He didn't create you to be miserable. He didn't. There's a lot that's happened that makes us miserable, but he didn't make that for us. And so we want to look at, God, which plan am I picking day in, day out? And just look at that this week. Don't beat yourself up. We're learning. So look at it. Notice it. Notice what's underneath that plan, the why behind it, the belief. Do I think I can be better at creating the plan, or do I think that God might be better with his plan for how to create fulfillment inside of me? And I just want to leave us with this one last verse because it's so encouraging when we look at these things. And it's out of James 4, and it's verse 8a. And it promises this: draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Sometimes we feel very far away. I don't know if you do right now, or if some of what we've talked about today, you think about those moments when you felt crumbly, or maybe you feel crumbly. It can feel like God is very, very far away. And maybe that he doesn't want to help us, or he doesn't have a plan, or he's not trying to help us be fulfilled. But we really do have to pick our plan or his plan. It's not both. It's one or the other. And he promises us, if we will draw near to him, if we'll reach out and say with our will, with our heart, God, I want your help. I feel like you're far away. I feel like maybe I'm picking this plan and I wish I was picking more of that plan, but it's hard. I'm scared. And if we will draw near to him, he's going to draw near to us. And he's going to help us if that's what we want. So I just leave that with you to look at this week. Notice your life, and we will get back together and unpack a little bit more about why do we do what we do. But until then, have a fantastic week. Look forward to talking with you next time. Thanks.